Welcome to another episode of Binary Ninja Basics. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about hotkeys and actions, how you can do things and interact with a keyboard and avoiding the mouse as much as possible. First of all, a couple of things you can do right from the homepage. You can actually just hit a recent file number just by hitting number 1, for example, and open up the most recent file. You might not know all of the hotkeys that you could do at any given moment. There's a couple ways you can find that out. First, you can check the user documentation, where the Getting Started guide actually has a whole section on hotkeys. Right, and so the default hotkeys here will give you most of the generic kind of default hotkeys you would use to navigate around. Then there's a few extra ones that exist over in the type guide, because there's a whole set of hotkeys specifically for interacting with types, changing the size of the type, creating a string, creating a pointer, creating an array, and then the S magic hotkey that will just create a structure based on what's actually happened. And the other main key features of interacting with hotkeys are that you can actually remap all of them, of course. So I just hit Control-Shift-B on Linux or Windows, and then on Mac that would be Command-Shift-B for your key bindings. And so that's the mnemonic there for that one. And you'll see we've actually got tons and tons of kind of actions described throughout the UI, along with the default, and then whether my current binding matches that one or not. So you'll notice that as I scroll through the list, there can be some changes. So like this one, for example, where I've made a custom keybind for reset window layout. The default is Control-Shift-R, and I've actually cleared it because on my particular bindings, I've got a separate action that I prefer to take. Because on my settings, I've actually got a particular layout. Like I've got the ability to save and load window layouts, and I wanted to map that hotkey to a different layout instead of the normal default to one that I like that's different. You'll notice here I've also searched. You can just click and type in the name of any of these actions that you want to take, and you'll see the key binding that matches with it, whether it's a default, anything that kind of matches there. My favorite way of interacting, though, is actually not even directly using the hotkeys themselves, but is hitting Control-P or Command-P, which is the command palette. And from here, I can actually type in all of those actions we saw before, like layout, and it shows me all of the actions that have the word layout in them. And so you can see my load normal layout, where I've got my custom hotkey. It shows that hotkey right here. So you can not only discover new hotkeys, but also just quickly take a number of different actions without even having to know the hotkey. You see it shifted my layout slightly back to this default layout that I wanted. But I could also hit Control-P and choose a different layout if I wanted. This is my minimal layout that I've got. Again, I can bind that. So let's go ahead and go back to Control-Shift-B or key bindings. And we can take the minimal layout. So if I double click here, I can hit a hotkey like Control-Shift-L. And then if I want to load my minimal layout, I can hit that hotkey and trigger the layout. One other thing to mention about the command palette is you'll notice when I hit Control-P that some of these options are blue up top. There's a nice most recent use list, and so that the last thing you've done in the command palette is always going to be up top, which just lets you hit Control-P or Command-P and enter to do something if you're frequently doing it, and just makes it easier than typing to be able to maybe hit down a couple times to find something you've recently run, which is really helpful. Any plugin that is registered is also triggerable through here and can add its own custom actions and commands. This really makes it very easy for you to map custom key bindings to anything a plugin can do, and it's also worth mentioning that the Snippets plugin, which is not installed by default, but you can install it from our plugin manager, is another nice way to write little custom snippets of Python, create a key binding from there as well. You have a little couple lines of code that you want to write to do something frequently, bind that to a custom hotkey and trigger it, given the full UI context anywhere you wanted in the binary. There is also something that is not doable with the UI currently, but because all of the settings inside of the key bindings are available in your user folder under a keybindings.json file, you can actually map multiple hotkeys to the same action. So if there's other hotkeys that you want to do, you can put them into this particular file by making a list of hotkeys. And so we'll have an example link in the description to show how you can do that. But the UI doesn't make it super convenient to do that, but easy enough to just edit this file and add that. And it's also nice because you can quickly see all of the hotkeys that you've changed from the defaults. So one of the other lesser known features as well is that you can not only map a single hotkey, but you can actually do a sequence of keys. So if, for example, I wanted to change display as float, let's do Control D maybe as a good hotkey prefix, and we'll do Control D, Control F, and that sequence of keys would then change this value to a float. So if I double click the keybind, Control D, Control F, and you'll notice it's actually got this whole sequence now. So if I go back to, say, this value and then go Control D, Control F, I've actually changed that to a float. And so that allows you to really kind of nest and stack hotkeys in a way that's much more powerful than just a single mapping would be. And again, that is different if you're looking at the key bindings file from doing a multiple hotkeys where you actually have a list of multiple keys that either one of them could be mapped. This will instead require both of these keys in sequence, one after the other. So again, it's really easy to navigate in Binary Ninja as well using the hotkeys. So one of the things that when you're in any of the views, you can actually use the arrow keys to navigate between lines. You can hit space, for example, to switch to a graph view. So if I'm in graph view and I'm navigating with the hotkeys, you'll notice that when I hit down onto something that has multiple destinations, it'll highlight the branch that I'm about to take if I hit down again. But I can also choose a different branch instead if I want to navigate to a different branch.